Scoodly doo doo da doodle deedle doodle doddle deedle doddle doodle day.
Day.
Shabba dooba dabba deedle doddle doo deedle doddle doo.
Day.
Dooba dabba doo shabba dabba doo. Skeel doddle doodle deedle doodle dee da. Beepa dabba doopy deepa dabba doo bop. Beepy 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 deepy doopa doo bop. Squimple dumple. Deepa dabba. Shooba doo bop. Beepy beepy doo boop. Boppa da boppa da bop. Boopy doopy doopy doo doopa doo. Wait, I don't know.
Can you tell that the intro is no longer on the screen, Mom?
Oh, now I can. Oh, does that mean I have to get off the screen? My bad. There we go. I'm off.
Hello, ladies and other ladies, and welcome to another episode of Nobody Asked with Maria.
Hello.
And Colin. I am full of joy. Today we're talking about McCarthyism. What is it? And is there an analogy or maybe two in the modern era? And can we learn something from it? And also, can we do anything about it? Spoiler, no.
No, you don't think so?
No, you can't do anything about anything.
I mean, that seems like a depressing take. I feel like that's not the takeaway. That's not a takeaway I got anyway.
From studying McCarthyism?
Yeah.
The takeaway that I have is that, trying to do anything is like an ant trying to prevent a boulder from going down a hill at this point. So, I think that there's a good chance that, clearly, many of the things that we're going to draw analogies to have drawn the ire of the public. And the public is a bunch of ants. And with enough, you know what they say, with enough ants, you can stop a boulder, depending on the ant to boulder size ratio. That's the classic saying, the idiom of America. And there are a lot of ants.
High hopes. We've got high hopes. We've got.
Hi, Barbie. Hi, Sarah. And hi to my girlfriend who calls me a negative Nelly.
You can move the rubber tree plant. That's the song, right? How many ants can move a rubber tree plant? He's got high hopes. I don't know. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's the one. That's the one.
How do you change the socio-political atmosphere of America in enough time where you live to see the impacts of your actions? Definitely not domestic terrorism.
Oh, that wasn't what I thought you were going to say. Sarah thinks you need a good indica. I don't think you do.
Isn't indica the chilling one?
I don't know. Theoretically, but Colin's had bad past experiences, so I don't see him doing that.
That was with edibles. That's a completely different thing. With the same thing in it. But, my mistake was letting Chris make edibles,
Yep.
Chris
didn't work well.
He's not a big measurer, that guy. I remember, when we all turned 21 and we were legally allowed to drink, we all got into bartending, and I was super into the balancing and the mixing of it all. And Chris kind of hopped on that train with me and was into the bartending, but he wasn't so much into the artistry and the balancing. He was into the idea that you could make a lot of alcohol taste like no alcohol. And and so immediately, I think probably like a month, maybe less, into him learning bartending, he would bring these drinks out and be like, try this. And it would be like a Coke can size drink, like lemon juice and whatnot. And you'd take a sip and you'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. And he'd go, that has 12 shots in it. And you would look and you'd be like, 12 shots does not fit in this, just of straight alcohol. But that was his whole thing, is that he would say that things had so many more shots in it than they did. He was so proud of how many shots he was able to cover up. And that is why he's now a successful businessman.
But don't trust him with measurements because he puts too much.
He will make you think that you're living through a near-death experience with an edible. Meanwhile, everyone else that takes the exact same edibles is just chilling out watching Scott Pilgrim in the living room. Meanwhile, you're on the phone with your girlfriend like, this is it. This is the end of life here. I think I'm going to be stuck in this moment for the rest of time. I think I'm about to be folded into one dimension. You know?
Oh, one dimension? You're going to be a single point?
It was not a vibe. And I actually was. And I've been there forever. Do you want to introduce the first topic?
Sure. We're going to talk about
Just kidding. Today's episode of Nobody Asked is brought to you by the NSA. Nobody asked. We did. We just didn't tell you that we asked. And we listened. And we took all this information. And we think it's really interesting what you think about the Justice Department. And what you think about certain senators from West Virginia. What were you planning? We know. Why don't you meet us at Arby's? We will enjoy a roast beef sandwich with the extra cheese sauce. The NSA.
So is a roast beef sandwich with extra cheese sauce code for something? Because I'm really concerned.
No, Arby's is a front for the NSA. It's where they have all their official business meetings. There's never anyone actually in an Arby's. You should know this. Your son worked for Arby's for a little while.
He did. Yeah. Owen did work there. Yeah.
He was throwing off all their operations because he liked the mozzarella sticks. He would accidentally stumble into all sorts of different proceedings. They'd be like, Jesus.
He used to come home with a lot of apple turnovers at the end of the day, too. I don't know if that means anything. Apple turnovers.
Enjoy an apple turnover. And turn over your documents.
Nicely done, sir. Nicely done, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Should we talk legitimately about McCarthyism or no? Just talk about Arby's. I don't know. Whatever feels good. Okay, so what's McCarthyism? In the simplest terms, it's accusations of, being subversive or treason, generally in relationship to communism. And right after World War II, right after World War II in particular, we just dove headfirst right into the Cold War with Russia. We were aligned with them during World War II, but that quickly just flipped directions, and suddenly we are in all kinds of drama with them. They have suddenly gotten all sorts of nuclear bomb secrets, and we're like, whoa, how did you get all that stuff? You guys are way further ahead than this than you should be. We're the only ones with those kinds of weapons. How did you get those? What's going on? Who's handing that stuff to the Russians? There was a coup in Czechoslovakia. We had the Korean War going. It was just right there on the precipice. Mao Zedong just took power in China. We had all kinds of communist situations happening in the world that was making it seem quite scary to be an American. And some of your activities, perhaps you believed in communism after the Great Depression, where you saw your jobs disappear and, you wanted to unionize the workers. And those were things that the Communist Party seemed to be able to do. So maybe you went to a couple of meetings. You thought, hey, man, this might be a good idea. And now if you went to one meeting, suddenly you were in a great deal of dangers. Ooh, look at that. That's a great illustration of old Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin. He was a Republican. He was a junior senator, so he wasn't really way up there or anything. But somewhere along the way, actually, I don't even know how exactly he got the old job. Do you know how he got the job? How did he start doing this stuff?
I'm sorry, which job? The job of standing on these hearings? The job of being a senator? What do you mean?
No, not a senator. how did he suddenly get involved with being obsessed with rooting out communism with loyalty boards and stuff?
So one thing that's important to realize about McCarthy is that there's a lot of evidence from his infancy that he was somebody that knew that he wanted to be a politician. And so a lot of the choices that he made, from being a lawyer to leaving an esteemed position as a judge to go and fight in World War II, were decisions that were made knowing that they would assist him in getting elected as a senator eventually. And what the what the reasons were behind his desire for power is the cause of much debate. But what is widely believed to be the moment that made him the anti-communist figurehead was a speech that he gave in West Virginia while he was on the campaign trail for his second time running for Senate. He was in West Virginia at a location that it was like Henley, West Virginia. It was not a glamorous location. Not that West Virginia has any glamorous locations in West Virginia. And he was giving a speech in front of many Republican decision makers, and it was Abraham Lincoln's birthday, I believe, which at the time was a classic like Republican celebration day, because at that point Republicans were a big fan of the fact that they had an anti-slavery president in their lineup, and how things have changed. But speaking in front of these powerful Republicans, and the way that it's said is that he had 8 speeches in his hand and hadn't decided which one to use. But there was one which was given to him by his aides, where he would talk about something that he actually was informed about, which was American housing policy. McCarthy knew a ton about American housing policy, but recently some actual Russian spies have been prosecuted that were in the U.S. government. I forget what that was called, like the D-25 or something. But some actual Russian spies had been prosecuted, and McCarthy had zeroed in on this idea that he could stir up a base by insinuating that there was a cabal of communists that were making all of the decisions at the top of the government. And so the speech that he actually ended up giving, again, there's controversy about it. There's many different versions of the speech, but he held up a list in this speech, and he said that he had uncovered individually that at every level of government, the decision makers were actually communists that were looking to undermine the power and patriotism of the American people, and that he had a list of 57 communists that he held up in his hand. And there's evidence now that it was actually just a list that had been circulated like 20 years ago. Many of these people were not in the government at all. But he held up this list that did not have 57 members on it at all and said, I have this list, and I would read them to you all now, but I want to work with the Truman administration to determine what we're going to do about these people. And he stirred up the base of people that he spoke in front of. And that first night, it was because of where it was in West Virginia. It was not covered. It was picked up only by the local journal, in which they covered and attempted to restate what McCarthy had said in his speech. But by the following day, every major news source was attributing to McCarthy that he was breaking open a major conspiracy in the government by a set of communists. And within that next year, McCarthy was the most favorably seen politician outside of the war hero president, who was
Eisenhower.
Thank you. Outside of Eisenhower, he was the most supported politician ever. And he began holding these hearings after being elected as a senator to bring down this communist cabal. And the only problem was that he had said that he had this long list of communists, but he didn't actually have a list. He just knew that he would become a celebrity by insinuating that he had it. And it worked, and then he had to deliver upon that, and thus began a long set of hearings where McCarthy abused his power. But in an interest that was very favorably seen by the American people, which was weeding out communists from American government, from undermining America. And it was not like, I mean, it wasn't like for all the love that Eisenhower gets. Eisenhower fed into this for a pretty significant amount of time before those Army hearings that you'll discuss.
Yep. So, but like when it first started, we had Truman, right? Because this is like 1947 is kind of when the idea of these loyalty screenings started. Harry Truman signed an executive order, and it basically called for background checks for all federal employees, with the purpose of, finding out if you had subversive association with groups that advocate, I guess, taking over the government via unconstitutional means. So it started with Harry Truman. Harry Truman, that's the end of World War II. He is president that decided to drop the bombs. So, it hits a little different when you know that, to me. But he's the one that started it. And literally, I mean, let's see, the Senate had its own committees, its own boards. The House of Representatives had its own boards. State governments had their own boards. Local governments had their own boards, where you had to start doing loyalty screenings. And it just started trickling down and trickling down and trickling down. And, you could be a school teacher educating children, right? And suddenly you might be a dangerous person if you ever went to a communist meeting or had any sort of association. And once you got blacklisted, it was incredibly difficult to get a job ever again, even if it wasn't true. They definitely did find there were some spies. Like, there was some reason to be concerned. There were a few spies with regard to, they were kind of around the Manhattan Project and stuff like that did give some secrets away. It wasn't like there were zero, but it was grossly exaggerated. There was something like 109 congressional investigations that happened. And there were quite a few people that were convicted. And later, some of these things got overturned because some of these laws were decided. A new Supreme Court got, a new chief of the Supreme Court took office in, I believe, 1953. Not office, but he became the chief then. I believe Chief Vinson died, and then Chief Warren became the Chief Justice. And suddenly you had a much more liberal Supreme Court. And basically, they just started flicking away all of these different laws that were coming into effect, because there was a lot. Every state was instituting its own laws about your loyalties, about communism, about all of this stuff, how you associate, what you were reading. It got pretty insane. Let's see. In 1953, McCarthy headed a Senate committee, or a loyalty board, and they went after overseas library programs, and they forced them to remove books that were authored by people that were deemed inappropriate because they were passing communist ideas, right? Now, it got to a point where they said, okay, we can have books about communism, just explaining what it is, that are written by anti-communist people, but anything that's pro-communism, we must burn the books. So that's what we started, book burning, around this time during this Red Scare with McCarthy. That was one of the first kind of moves that he made in this process.
Yep. And that, I think the first thing that's interesting in contextualizing this is the fact that the legitimacy of Russian spies was, there were Russian spies that were at the top levels of government and in the Manhattan Project. And if those spies had been rooted out, that I'm not attesting whether or not it was possible, but had they been rooted out before, as early as possible, there was a potential that the Russians would not have been able to create nuclear warheads, which was what created the Cold War and what created a significant panic in America. So the stakes there, that's about as high as stakes get, is Russians having war. I still am pretty mad that Russians have warheads. So it's affecting us pretty far down the line at this point.
Yep.
And that's enough to stoke some pretty significant fears in a lot of people. And the type of language that began to be touted in this era was that free speech was among the important elements of a democracy, but the best type of a free democracy was one that was able to determine when certain types of ideologies were meritless and then take them off the table entirely. And what that meant was never allow people in future generations to reopen the book on them. Now, the easiest one that was used as an example, and it was super easy in the 50s, people were not a big fan of Nazis, was Nazis.
Yep.
Because it's a pretty open and shut case. Nazis are pieces of shit, and I think that it should be legally protected free speech to punch Nazis in the face. But that was the classic example of like, oh, you can see how this one ideology, we can close the book, and any good society would close the book on this and say that this type of an ideology is evidence for evil. And then what it got expanded out to, because communism was connected to the Soviet Union, connected to different communist entities that America had framed as entirely evil when they're only a little evil, was I mean, they're evil, but that communism was this same sort of an open and shut case, and that was this type of language that was used to bring many pro-free speech citizens in America over to the side of, you know what, free speech includes certain ideologies being off limits.
Sorry, I got distracted by your comments. I don't know what means.
I'm just wondering what you're
being distracted. I was reading the private comment and I was like, I don't know what that means either. I don't know what we're talking about. I've lost context.
No, you sent me an emoji 7 minutes into the podcast, and I said, what does this mean about the emoji?
I didn't know I sent you an emoji, so I don't know what it means. So, my bad.
You didn't know you sent me an emoji in private chat?
Nope.
Right,
hi, Diamond Girl. Okay, let's see. Where are we at on this thing? Where are we at on my notes, on my notes? Okay, so in 1953, McCarthy has decided that he wants to investigate the army. He believes that there is some subversive activity, there's some spies, there's some nonsense, there's some shenanigans going on within the army. He works through these various different branches. He keeps getting squashed by, higher ups in the military that are like, please knock your bullshit off, please don't aim this nonsense at us. But he keeps going. He keeps talking about stories about spies that are unsubstantiated. And this all culminates in a decision to have a 36-day live hearings that are broadcast on television that are basically, they're called the Army McCarthy hearings, where they spend. Go ahead.
Can I just hit on some stuff that happens before those Army McCarthy hearings?
Shoot, sure.
I mean, one element is that this was not like there were a number of hearings before that were successful 100%. And in which McCarthy was able to shut out cameras. And this was pretty important to McCarthy's modus operandi, was keeping those cameras out, because McCarthy couldn't stand up to scrutiny. And what would eventually happen was McCarthy would be contextualized as a repeated liar, and even things that were true about his past, like he was a war hero and he did volunteer. Like he had no need to be on the front lines or to be in any sort of a dangerous situation, and he volunteered to be on attack helicopters manning guns, which was unheard of at his level in the military. But no one believed him until a recent biography came out, because there wasn't substantial proof and he was known to be a liar. But one thing was that in these hearings, as time went on, he would break more and more conventions that Congress had for legal hearings. Among them, he would host single congressman hearings, where McCarthy was the only congressman in attendance and the only deciding vote on many of the individuals which he was prosecuting. And he would use all sorts of political tactics to keep other politicians out of them, and to keep the media out of them. And by the accounts of those that were eventually exonerated from these hearings, uh, McCarthy would essentially take the time away from those that were being tried and just tell them what they were saying, which was just
Yeah.
hilarious. He had gotten, I mean, the fame and the power had gotten so far to his head that he believed he was an invincible, and so these hearings against the army were, I mean, just think about in a time of incredibly high American patriotism. We're leading into the Cold War. We're coming out of World War II. We are emerging as the superpower. Patriotism is at an all-time high. Patriotism is the moral standard. It's like
Right.
America Jesus at that point. And he decides to go after the army. This
Yep.
is that this is power getting to someone's head. This is when Trump said in his election that he could stand in the middle of Times Square and shoot someone in the chest and still be voted for, which he was totally right about. There's the thought is that there's got to be some line for Trump, and that we just haven't found it yet. But this was the line for McCarthy. A lot of people thought the line for Trump would be when he insinuated that John McCain was a loser and that he wasn't a war hero because he got captured. A lot of people thought that he had committed the same McCarthyian mistake, which was to undermine the military, which is the foundation of much of your base. But we were wrong about that. So yes,
No,
that
yeah.
led into the U.S. Army hearings in which he had insinuated that there was another cabal of communists at a military base in Monmouth, New Jersey, which is just a random fun fact, the site now of the second largest Netflix studio in America.
Oh.
It's recently been bought up. It was closed after, I think, like 10 or 20 years after the McCarthy hearings. It never really got the stink off of it, even though everyone eventually hated McCarthy. This station in New Jersey, which had been integral to the Army for a very long time, never got the stink of these hearings off of it. So they eventually closed it down. And then Monmouth, New Jersey has been trying to sell it to somebody for like 30 years, and now Netflix has bought it.
Super cool.
Fun
That's
history.
weird. That is a weird piece of fun history. I also want to say during a lot of the hearings that McCarthy was doing with the Senate, he would, his informants were all secret informants, right? And a lot of times, if you were accused, the only way to get out of it was basically to accuse somebody else. So now you're a secret informant. You're giving stuff away. And then when you would have the trial, very often, like, you had no right to, to question your accuser. You didn't have any right to know who your accuser was, nor did you even have a right to know what you were being accused of. They were just throwing everything at you, and you were just sort of screwed, basically. There was several people that did, 3 years, 5 years. The ones that there was a couple that was convicted of some major espionage with regard to nuclear weapons, and they legitimately did do it, and they were both sentenced to death. So, this was serious business. This wasn't a light matter. And so, everybody's watching their neighbor. Everybody's scared that something that they did 20 years ago when communism didn't seem quite so scary is now going to bite them in the ass now and affect their livelihood, affect their freedom to even move through the world. So it was scary to be on any side of this matter. So then you go and you accuse the Army, and it gets televised because the Senate I feel like they maybe didn't want to make a decision behind closed doors. Let's just open this up to everybody. Let's watch this in front of a live audience. And it got real weird. So it started off with the Army kind of saying that McCarthy was pressuring the Army to give preferential treatment to one of his former aides who had been drafted. And McCarthy's stance on that is like, well, everybody does that, that's just common practice, right? I can use my political clout to get him a better deal. Yes, I'm not getting him out of the Army. He's in the Army, but we can get him a better deal. Everybody does that. And meanwhile, McCarthy is, he's saying that that's bad faith to even bring that stuff up. This is just retribution for me having all of this evidence that we have a big problem here in this army, his lawyer wanted him to shut up. Just be quiet. I'll run this case for you. But McCarthy is full of ego and hubris and could not help himself and had plenty of stupid things to say. There were points where he would sort of bring up somebody's homosexuality, because that was very much part of this whole thing as well. If you had, I don't know if they viewed that as just, it was immoral. So if you're immoral in this way, then obviously you would also be a spy. Or if it was that somebody would use this against you as blackmail, and so they could turn you into a spy against your will. I don't know, but there was all these very weird homosexual entanglements that were part of this trial that are just so strange. Calling people pixies and fairies and stuff. And it's just like, what is happening? What's happening here? Ooh, that image that you showed up, that cartoon. During the trial.
I think I just lost you. I can't hear you.